Good morning and good afternoon. Welcome to this live webinar. My name is Dave.
Hi there, welcome. My name is Ivar.
And thank you for joining this live webinar around live sound with a zoom and a focus on ShowMatch.
Yes.
Before we dive into that, I would like to introduce a guest speaker, a colleague that we have live in our session today.
Yeah, we have a live connection with Sweden, and that's our colleague Jürgen. Jürgen, are you there?
I am here. Thank you.
Welcome. Can you introduce yourself for us, please, Jürgen?
Yeah, so my name is Jürgen, and I'm working as the regional sales engineer. That means that I'm designing and tuning system for our dealers.
Thank you.
Good.
Yeah.
So we have Jürgen live in our live session. So we really working hard to make sure that all the delays are working fine. So far, so good. So before we start with the webinar, I would like to highlight that this is a live webinar. During the webinar, you have the opportunity to leave questions in the Q&A tab of your webinar view. Please feel free to leave them there. It's very convenient for us to filter on all your questions at the end of the webinar.
Yes.
So that being said,
ShowMatch today, live sound.
ShowMatch.
Yeah, I'm excited, and we're also going to talk about the HAMMERFALL story, the tour that we did.
Yeah.
So I think let's do a deep dive into our live sound with our ShowMatch products.
Let's get started.
Let's get started.
Great sound for everyone, and that's where this webinar is about. It's about delivering great sound and an awesome experience in live sound environments, so in events. So today we're going to talk about the product ShowMatch in all of the details and the technology behind it, DELTAQ.
Yeah.
But before we dive into that, it's important also to understand what the room can do with sound, Ivar.
Makes sense, because you can have a great sound system, but the room affects the sound. And to show you that, we want to talk about that. Well, actually, our colleague Jürgen, that we just introduced, about what's the effect of a room. What can a room have for effect on your sound system?
Yeah.
So
what are the influences of the walls, the material used, the size of the room,
projection of your sound system. So Jürgen, can you explain us more about this?
Well, the first thing that we should do by checking into this one is to kind of get ourselves a reference, and that is by going outdoor. Now, this site is about 35 times 18 meters. That would sit about 900 people. And as we are outdoor, there is no reverberation at all. The graph to the upper right corner, you can see time, so from 0 to 2 seconds, and you see the frequency on the x-axis. I put 2 line arrays on each side, left and right, and they both contains 12 modules. They're using the 100 horizontal waveguides in all the modules. And at the front of house position, so that's the position where you find the mixing engineer. It says FOH on the graph there. There is a position where we kind of put our measurement microphone, and on that spot I also equalize the system to a flat response. So you might think of why it's so flat. Maybe you don't like it to be flat, and the reason is that for this purpose, it's easier to remember a flat response than a tilted curve or something that has a contour. So, adding just one wall. Now we are in the quasic acoustic environment, as you still can see, the reverberation is still at 0. So just one mole doesn't make it into a 3-dimensional acoustic space. But if you look at the frequency response, something very different happened there. There is a reflection from that wall coming in at about 7.5 millisecond and arriving to the front of house position. Now 7.5 millisecond, that is about 133 hertz. So that would be the fundamental. And from that frequency, you have in phase or out of phase as the phase wheel is spinning, so to say. So there's a lot of ripple, summation and cancellation. Now let's just add 3 more walls. All of a sudden we have a 3-dimensional acoustic space, and you have a reverberation of roughly about 1.6 second. And the frequency graph also change. As we have more walls, we have more reflections, and the ripples just changed to something different. If we then add the ceiling to this little room, all of a sudden we have more reverberation because we have more surfaces that bounce off. The material in this room is a traditional, I would say, a concert hall more or less. It has a mixture of perforated and some are just flat panels. And now we are up at 1.8 second in the midbands of reverberation. You can also see that in the frequency graph, you have new ripples, you have a build up in the low frequency, and you have new ripples in the mid. So all in all, if you look at the combination where we started from the outdoor, running the system at flat, the system runs on flat all the way to the totally indoor situation. So I didn't change the EQ, but I just added surfaces and surfaces and surfaces. And you can see one of the big thing that actually happens when you go from outdoor to indoor is that you have such a diffuse field of reflections, so your frequency response is really not what you expected, or at least it's not what you started out with.
Thanks, Jurgen, for this detailed overview. It's really interesting to see what walls or what a room does with your sound and the sound quality, and
it
your
affects a lot.
story really highlights that. That's super interesting.
Yeah.
So our product Ivar, our ShowMatch products, they use DELTAQ as the technology in our Room Edge and ShowMatch products. So could we dive into what DELTAQ technology actually is?
I think that's interesting. So let me explain the DELTAQ technology, Dave. So let's check out how DELTAQ works and how we see that in a room. So imagine that we have a room with some audience, and we want to project sound in that room. And in this case, we only highlight for now the back seat, let's say the back seat area. And you see what's happening with a, let's say, traditional line array system or traditional speaker system with the same horizontal control. You see that you also you reach audience, or you reach areas where you don't want to be. You want to actually we want to avoid that. So you see on the left side that we also hit the wall, and we have some overlap on the right side, and that's basically what our DELTAQ technology can solve. And how does that look like? Well, let's see this room, and what we want to do is we want to, let's say, keep control of the horizontal part, the section, as also the vertical. And as you can see, this is in the animation it illustrates that we have, let's say, 3 sources, and those also have a different vertical opening. So this is our mission, to only reach the people that we want to reach and no areas or surfaces around. And this is what DELTAQ technology actually is. And how do we achieve this? With the use of a EMB2S driver, or actually 4 mounted on a CATS manifold. So what's that driver? Well, The EMB2, in this case the S, we talk about ShowMatch. This is an improved version of the RoomMatch driver. We started in the RoomMatch with the EMB2. Our goal was to avoid the vocal range. So we needed to create a driver that can go very low. And this EMB2S driver goes even lower than the RoomMatch driver. It's improved. It can go down to 300 Hertz all the way down, and that's really low. We're not going to use it in our cabinets with up to 300 Hertz, but the mission was avoid vocal range. So we do not want to have crossovers in the vocal range. And that's what you see here. So it starts under the 1K and it goes all the way up. So we have a two-way cabinet. And that's a really interesting thing to see, because this is a really small driver. This driver needed to be small because, as you could see in the RoomMatch, we mounted 6 drivers. In the ShowMatch, so the improved version, we use 4. And those 4 drivers are all mounted on our CATS manifold that we're going to highlight in a minute. Right. They need to work together. They work together, of course, and you can imagine that it's easier to work with 4 than work alone.
So, Ivar, is there any, because you would say for ShowMatch, you also need 6. So why? How do we solve that? Yeah. And what is the difference between the S10 and the normal?
Yeah, good point. Well, in the ShowMatch cabinets needed to be portable, so it needs to be lightweighted, small form factor, let's say. So that was the reason why we needed to, let's say, re-engineer the EMB2S, because we wanted to have, let's say, the same or even more SPL. Actually, the ShowMatch has more SPL. So we needed to improve that driver. So this driver is improved. It has a higher SPL than the original ones, and we wanted to have at least 4 of those units, those drivers inside. Yeah. So those 4 are really those have a small form factor. It's only 60 millimeters. it needs to be small because it needs to fit in the cabinet.
If you see how low it can go, I think it's amazing for that small.
Yes, exactly.
Small driver size.
Yeah, and that's mounted on the CATS manifold, the continuous arc diffraction slot, as you can see here. And here you see that 4 drivers are mounted, and they are coming out of the, let's say, the cabinet with equal spacing, perfectly aligned with each other. So no unwanted phase behavior. Everything needs to be perfectly aligned to get the best result in tonal balance. So that's how we work with the EMB2 on the CATS. And if you see how that works out in the line array of ShowMatch, check the vertical modules, and then you see that 3, in this case 5 degrees, we have multiple vertical angles, 3 5 degrees modules, CATS manifolds connected to each other, can handle 15 degrees, but in this case we mounted a 5, a 10 and a 20 degrees. So with that same, let's say, 3 pieces of boxes, we can create 15 degrees, or in this case 35 degrees. So we are, let's say, scalable as well. We can create any configuration that we want.
Yeah, so we're pretty flexible.
We're flexible.
Depending on the requirements for the room or for your show.
Yes.
You can really adjust the vertical opening.
And everything is perfectly in balance. So one of the advantages of the DELTAQ technology is also due to the fact that we have that different vertical angles. There's no need for gain shading anymore, because those cabinets are let's say, controlling the gain. So it's a physical way of controlling the consistency of the SPL from front to back. And that's also an advantage of the ShowMatch system. So no need for any kind of gain shading with DELTAQ technology.
Yeah. So in fact, with the 5 degree boxes or units that we have, you can really throw far.
Yes.
And with the boxes that we have underneath, you could really cover the front area.
Exactly. So the lower you
listening
go,
area.
the bigger the vertical opening.
Yeah.
That's the idea. Yeah. So if you see the cats here, you see those 4 drivers are coming out, and then we talked about that vertical coverage control. But what's also the big advantage of DELTAQ is that we also have control of the horizontal coverage. And therefore we have waveguide panels, as you can see here. So here you see an animation of changeable wave panels, waveguides as we say, and we have different angles available. So we have a 55 degrees horizontal, a 70, 100 degree, by the way that's standard out of the box, and 120 degree for the downfills, the 20 degrees, so that you want to throw in front of the stage with a wide opening.
Yeah. So do you have to use these waveguides always in the same pairs, or can you also mix them?
No, you can actually, and we call that asymmetrical projection. So
Right.
you can also use a 70 with a 100 degree wave guide panels.
Yeah.
So you can change it. Actually, Dave, behind
Yeah,
you see
here.
I see 70 and then
This one is asymmetric.
yeah. So if you want to avoid reflections on the wall, or you have a different venue, you can use asymmetrical versions to get a better result. So let's check an example of how an array looks like, DELTAQ array. Here you see a 6-box array, a SM5 on the top, 5 vertical, 5 degrees vertical, 55 degrees horizontal. Then we go over to a 3rd box, 70 degrees, also 5 degrees vertical, and then 2 times a 10 degrees vertical, 200, so we spread it more, and then the downfill 20 to 120 degrees. As an example, you can create any combination that you want, but this is a typical example. And that also means that we are scalable. So check this out, we have 4 arrays here. Those all have the same vertical total opening, but with fewer boxes to the left side than on the right side. So if you have a rock band, you want to have more SPL, so you want to use more cabinets, I guess. But it can also be an installation-wise thing that you need different angles because of budget reasons. Less cabinets, so it's also, scalability is also interesting for budget.
Yeah, let's call it scalability for different reasons, Ivar. Depending on your situation, the budget, and also the kind of experience you need to bring to the performance of the use case.
Exactly.
So, and that's really cool to see that with even a large cluster, you can also use a smaller cluster in different venues.
Exactly.
And situations.
Yeah, and that's really the advantage of the use of DELTAQ products. So now we know that DELTAQ, how it works, how we use it. I think it's interesting to see how we can use it in our design. So I think it's good to switch over to Jürgen. Jürgen, can you explain more about designing with the DELTAQ system?
Sure. Let's use the same room model again. But this time we're going to turn one of the side off, and as you can see, house right is only on. And we're using 100 waveguides in all the modules, so this is a kind of a standard touring system. And as you can see on the wall, there's about 3 dB louder on the wall compared to the ceilings. Now, in order to see the ceilings and the coverage, we're going to actually offset that 3 dB a little bit. And you can see on the scale that the red color starts at -3, so that's my offset. Now in this picture you can also see that the horizontal coverage is really wide. I mean, right side is covering all the way to the left, and that is actually a little bit too wide. So what we're going to change is going over to what we call the DELTAQ approach. So that means that we have sectioned the array in a long throw section, and mid throw section, and a short throw section. What happens when you do that is that you improve the throw distance. Now you can see that we don't need to offset anymore. We have equal level on the wall as to the ceilings, and we are about at the front of house position where we were about -3 dB before. Now we are at roughly about 0, so 3 dB more throw. And we also have reduced the wall reflections. The next thing I want to talk about is the difference in wall reflections. And we are going to investigate the first order of reflection, which is coming from the speaker, bouncing in the wall, and bouncing off that one into the front of house position. And the time it takes for that arrival is about 7.5 milliseconds. So let's compare the DELTAQ approach to the standard 100 horizontal waveguides. To do this a little bit easier, I have normalized all the levels from that reflection from the 100 degrees horizontal array to 0, and that's the red line. So the red line represents the level of all those reflections in all those frequencies you can see on the screen. And the gray curve is the same array, except that we changed the waveguides to what we call the DELTAQ, so going from 55 degrees to 70 degrees to 100 degrees in the bottom of the array. And as you can see on this graph, the level of the reflection can be reduced up to 6 dB or 5.9 if you have to be really picky there. And of course, that is a big improvement. When you listen to this, you're going to hear that the clarity, the vocal clarity, will improve a lot.
Thanks, Jürgen, for this explanation. And it's interesting to see how DELTAQ really pays off in those kind of situations. So thanks. Dave, I think it's time to jump into the hardware overview.
Yes.
Yeah?
Let's take a look, Igor.
Let's take a look.
Yes, so the ShowMatch hardware overview, here you see the modules that we have, so from SM5, SM10, SM20, so respectively the 5, 10 and 20 degrees of vertical coverage. Yeah, out of the box, the modules come with a 100 degree horizontal coverage waveguides. And of course there are also the other ones, the 55, the 70, the 100 and 120 degrees waveguides.
Yes.
The SM5 out of the box comes with
the 100, but you can use the 55 in the SM5, the 5 degrees vertical, with the 55 horizontal,
right?
Of hard throw. And for the downfill, we have the SM20 with a additional 120 degree waveguide kit available.
Yes. So then the rigging modules. So you see the full array frames, and you see the T-bar array frame. So basically the full frame supports the whole stack, including subs. Yeah, and the T-bar, you can fly the modules, but not the subs.
Yeah, exactly.
Then you have the multi-point adapter for multiple rigging points and a precise rigging for your array.
Yeah.
The crown stack bracket kit is really to build up your stack for on-stage configurations.
Yeah, this is a quite small bracket because we don't need an additional bracket in between. If you just want a quick ground stack with some modules on top, you can easily use this ground stack kit bracket. You just mount it on your sub, really easy, and then you within seconds, 2 minutes, then you have your ground stack. So really easy to do with the ground stack kit.
Nice. All right, so we have the pullback bracket to basically pull back your array, and then transition kit for connecting your array to the sub. Actually, we have here an example where you see on the right side the subwoofer, the SMS 118, with that bracket in between to support it. If you go to the Cardiot configuration, we have brackets there to fly that. Interesting aspect to mention is that on the front we have also a speaker connector, Ivar.
Yeah.
So if you're in the left configuration, you can just use one side to connect your subs.
Yes, exactly.
So let's take a look at the ShowMatch cards. Different cards, whether it's for your downfill or multiple modules like 4 times an SM5, to transport your airwave frames, we have different solutions to transport your equipment.
Exactly. So in this case, you see a downfill card, so easy to use for. Typically, you use for the downfills at 10, 20 degrees on the bottom, and this is a card that you can just use for downfills only. Yeah,
exactly. So here you see the ShowMatch sub dolly and the covers that come with it. So whether it's single sub, dual sub dollies, and nice covers to protect and your
protect
equipment.
your subs. Yes.
Yeah. So these what we call the ShowMatch touring racks. It's the amp racks to transport your amp racks. It's a PowerSoft amp.
Yeah, we use PowerSoft X series for amplification. Yes, and these are the amp racks.
Yeah. So then the ShowMatch subwoofer. Let's talk about that a little bit. Just kind of highlighted that we have this front connector. It's a ShowMatch 18-inch subwoofer.
Yep.
Comes.
That's what the name says. SMS ShowMatch sub, one time a 18-inch woofer.
Yep. Some specifications here.
I just see this, and maybe it's good to mention that of course these are the interesting numbers, let's say, and you see let's say two types of specs, and on the in the middle you see the Bose specs, and on the right side the industry well-known AES specs. So what's the big difference? We do our testing. I have to say our testing procedure is a little bit different, because the standard testing of the AES is a 2 hours full power test, and we as Bose we measure all our speakers a 500-hour test. So that's why you see a slight difference, and that's due to the fact that we have a longer testing measurement cycle. So that's the reason why you see two specs. And also for the sub. So if you want to know more about the specs, of course you can reach out to us or check the website. So I think that's it for now for the hardware overview, Dave. Thanks.
Yeah.
And I think now it's also interesting to see a case study, a use case. So let's jump back into the story. Well, the story, Jürgen, actually, I have to say, the story of HAMMERFALL. It's already announced in the comments on the website. We're going to check out how that tour went. So, Jürgen, can you explain us or show us more about the HAMMERFALL tour?
Sure. HAMMERFALL is a heavy metal band from Sweden that managed to perform about 27 gigs throughout Europe until the COVID-19 kind of stopped the whole show there. And one of the sites that we're going to use here is the MPH Arena in Ludwigsburg in Germany. And here we used the system contained of left and right. It was used 15 modules each side. The outfills were using 9 modules. And if you look carefully on this picture here, you can see on the stage there's 6 front fills and 18 subs in the front of the stage in a broadside array. And if you look really carefully, you can also see on the stage there is 2 stage filled, 2 ground stacks. And all this was powered by 8 amplifiers. And here you see a nice picture of the front of house engineer, Michael, and the systech, that was Franz Ebbesson, who is responsible for the design work and the tuning of the system for the entire tour. Now let's switch over to Focus. That's the software that we use to design the system. And the first big thing we're going to look at is stage left. So I turn off everything else and just looking at stage left. And I selected 6.3 kilohertz, as that is a really useful octave to obtain the function of the DELTAQ approach. What we wanted to do here is we wanted to kind of shape a rectangular coverage, or a stripe of coverage, you might say. It's so much easier when you have like rectangles to work with when you're putting in delays or outfills compared to, for example, if you would use 100 panels in all the array, then you would have a triangular coverage shape or a fan shape coverage. And when having that, the speaker will overlap in different. If you go all the way back, there's a lot of overlap due to the two triangles, and you walk to the front of the stage, there's less overlap. Same thing when you're adding outfills. If they are kind of the coverage is triangles, it's really difficult to work with that. So one good thing with the DELTAQ is these rectangular coverage shapes. So let's turn on the other side, so stage right and left, and you can see it's still a big block or a rectangular shape of in the 6,300 hertz area. So let's move on to the outfills. These are the 9 module arrays, and they do covering all the way back, but it is a rectangular shape, and it's just covering the upper seats or the side seats, I would say. Combine the whole thing, you can see, or it's a little overlap, but it's still a nice coverage throughout the room, even at this octave. Moving into the subsystem, Michael and Franz prefer to do this with the broadside array on the front of the stage, and the reason for this is they like to have one big wavefront projecting into the room, compared to if you would do this with the left and right sub, maybe sub array, because if you have left and right, so that probably sound better in the room, but then you're more or less changing the hairstyle of the people who are standing in front of them, because there's a lot of, think of the hard rock when the double kick starts beating in this type of music, and you have 18 subs on each side, and each of those cones have an excursion about 6 centimeter, powered by, what would that be, 92 kilowatt. So that's a lot of power for just a few people in the front row. So that's why they did the broadside. So let's look at the distribution, and this time I choose the A-wedded. So the green color you see here is the plus 3 dB and minus 3 dB coverage. And if you look at the bottom, the graph there tells you that 94.3% of the seating or in the area is within plus and minus 3 dB. So that's a really nice, good job the SysTech France did here. Usually you find a standard being 90% of the seating should be within the plus minus 3 dB. The other colors here, like the blue one, that is below minus 3 dB. If you find the orange or the red colors here, that is above plus 3 dB. Okay, let's move on to the SPL. I'm still using the A-wedged broadband pink noise. And as you can see in the bottom graph, it starts at 110 and slopes until at the last end at 46 meters as 105. Although the real number that you can measure is 6 dB louder. And the reason for that is that the way the file in ease is made is coming from our speaker power handling measurements, which is we actually have a concrete bunker that we put the speakers in, and we put pink noise and crank up the volume until they hardly break, and we keep that test for 500 hours. That is 21 days, and we squeeze down the pink noise into a 6 dB crest factor in order to heat up the speaker as much as possible. So if the speaker fails after 499 hours, we just reset with a little bit less power and redo the test until we have a full duration of 500 hours. Now that power handling is then used to calculate from the sensitivity to get your max SPL. That's why the max SPL in the EASE or at Modeler or in the tech data sheet only have 6 dB difference between the RMS and the peak. So as you can measure a 6 dB in real world, you need to understand and remember that this number here in EASE, if you want to have the peak, you add 6 dB. If you want to have the LEQ or the slow reading on your SPL meter, you need to subtract 6 dB. So easy showing something just in the middle. Okay, let's move on to the frequency response. This is how it looks like. It has a tilt up to 1K, and it has a contour in the low frequency, and that's about 15 dB extra of bottom. There's also a little peak, I would say, in the 10 to 12 there, and that is due to the humidity. At this stage it is a 60% humidity, 20 degrees, and of course it goes down to 40, that would even out that little bump, or if it goes up to 80 it would be even higher bump. So this is just in simulation. The real world would probably have another humidity, that's for sure. Moving on to the software that is used to control this system. This is Harmonia from PowerSoft, and to the left you can see there are 4 racks, the 2 racks that we use, and each of them have 2 X8s. And in the middle you can see all the speakers, and the system is really nice. It monitors the headroom of every component in here, and you can see the temperature, the health of the power, and so on. So that is Harmonia, that is used to control the system. Now the last thing that I want to talk about is some quotes. We start with Franz, and it's a lot of text there, but if he's saying that he thinks that speakers are small compared to the power, and I think he's saying that and the result of that is because we are using the 5 degrees vertical and also the 55 and 70 degrees horizontal, and that is features you often find in bigger or even large scale line array modules. But we took those features and we put them into this kind of compact class line array. And so looking at the size of the speaker and what's coming out of it, this could be a surprise. At least it was a surprise to Franz. Moving on to Michael, in his text there, I read that he liked the clarity and it was not harsh. And I think that's a result of the progressive coverage. When you're using the progressive coverage, you don't hit the walls, you don't get the reflections, and that kind of clears up the whole vocal range. And also, speaking about the harsh, as we have 4 2-inch drivers for high frequency, and when you push the system really hard, I mean, those 4 drivers are kind of diverting the energy into a fourth, and they don't have to work that hard compared to fewer drivers in each module. So that could be one of the reasons why I think it's not too harsh. Well, guys, back to the studio. This was all for me regards the HAMMERFALL.
Thank you, Jürgen. This is a wonderful explanation of Ease Focus and the HAMMERFALL live tour where we used our ShowMatch product.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to see this design, and yeah, they did a really good job. So thank you, Jürgen, for this explanation. I can imagine that there are some questions. So I think it's ready. Well, we are ready for the Q&A section. So if you have any questions, please feel free write them in the Q&A section of the webinar.
Yeah.
And we're going to review it. Jürgen is also still there to answer your questions. So, Dave?
Yeah, let's move to the Q&A.
Let's do it. Okay, so can you grab your laptop? Because I'm excited and I'm also checking the screen if there are some questions. Yes, there are some questions. Yes, I see a question for the 2 arrays you showed at the beginning. What is the subwoofer configuration for that system? I'm thinking, what array did we show at the beginning? Maybe that's the video that you... Maybe guest 124 can specify that question for us. Next question first. Can the ShowMatch be powered by the PowerSoft K series instead of the X series and achieve the same performance in terms of power and sound, Jürgen?
Oh, you threw that on me. Yeah, well, I mean, we developed everything and we tested everything with the X series, that's for sure. Everything is rated and working, and the power needed. I haven't checked in the other amplifiers. So to be safe, I would say stay with the X series, and we know everything is power at maximum.
Thank you. Dave.
Yes, I also see some questions popping in here on the private side. So let me mention them as well. How many SM boxes can you fly in an array frame, and how many can you fly in the T frame?
Jürgen.
Okay. So that will be 24 modules. You can fly the same in the full frame. You can fly the same numbers in the T frame. And when we're flying 24, we're still in the 10-to-1 safety factor.
Okay.
Okay. And how many subs? That's the next question here. How many subs can you fly in the array frame, Jürgen?
That will be 18. And then you can mix and match, of course, in between those numbers. But 18 subs in total.
Okay.
Next, is there a reason why the SM10 boxes are unable to do a 1 degree increment?
The SM10, you said?
SM10, yes. So is there a reason, SM10, why that's not possible with our SM10?
Well, actually, that is just a decision we took. The main reason for that is that when you out touring with the system, you, in general, you want to fly as low as possible, and you want to keep your array back into the stage and curve them as little as possible. That's kind of a general role if you talk to system engineers around the world. And then you're going to realize that usually the box are less than 5 degrees in splay angles. No matter what boxes you're using, except for the down part. So we found that there's actually no reason to use 10s up there, as they are in between 0 and 5 anyway. So it's just a decision that we took really early to just be able to splay the SM5s and just have the 10s and 20 as downfield. So maybe if you push the management, maybe they could, do another version of the 10 and make that splayable. That's not for me to decide.
No, okay, thank you.
Okay, before we continue, I'm doing a little time check. We're not going to end the webinar. We will continue with the Q&A. So for the folks that really want to stay with us and want to join us with all these questions, we keep the webinar open a little bit longer. So
we got
please
some
stay
questions.
with us.
Yeah.
And then we of course we have very interesting questions here.
Yeah.
So just switching a little bit back to the rigging, Ivar and Jürgen. What does the multi-point bracket do? Where do you use the multi-point bracket exactly? How do you use it?
So looking at both of the frames, you have 7 holes or pickups points in them. Now, of course, 7 is not much. So the multi-point takes that from 7 all the way up to 45 different points. So you have a really nice fine adjustment to find your pickup point and your pitch of the whole array.
Yes, that's clear.
Okay.
One more question: Is it a good practice to overlap the coverage for left and right array? And I think you mentioned something about this in your story, Jürgen. So can you say something about this?
That is a sensitive subject. That is very subjective. A few designers like to have a lot of overlap. I think it's also a little bit dependent on the program material. If you have a lot of like a lot of stereo sources, like keyboard and stuff like that, you want to have a wide stereo image throughout the audience. Then of course overlap is nice. If your primary source is more like vocals and which is coming out of the mix as a mono source, you can improve the vocal clarity by having more or less mono zones. And I know that doesn't sound something in your ear that you want to have, but that is a way of improving the vocal clarity. So zoning up the entire audience area may help you in difficult acoustic environments. So, no.
Okay, Dave.
Yeah, so I'm picking one from this one here. In which situations would it make sense for the use of asymmetrical waveguides?
That would be a typical installation scenario, I would say, where when you're really forced to put your array really close to a side wall, there's a good reason to shift the waveguides, and you shift the waveguides that is facing into the audience by having greater and greater angles. So maybe you start with the 55 degrees in the top module, and then you change for the next module to have still keep the 55 to the one who's facing to the wall, and the other one is facing into the audience. You shift that to a 70, and down the array you shift that to 100, and you end in the bottom with the 120 facing into the audience. So that means that you can not hit the wall as hard, and then you can still keep a nice wide coverage into the audience.
Thank you.
Thank you. Question, do you size the output needed for the speakers on the peak or RMS requirements? I think that, yeah.
Yeah, so we do spend some time on the limiters. We have a peak limiter. The peak limiter is there to protect the cone excursion, so they, just move too much, so to keep them safe in the movements. There is an RMS limiter, and that is more or less keeping the drivers from not burning up. So that is to control the heat. So we have two. Actually, there is a third one as well, but let's stay out of that one. But those two, they are keeping the system running. And of course, you always start with the peak, and then you find both of the voltage for the both sets.
Okay.
Okay, I see here a question related to the HAMMERFALL gig. So you showed an X4 in the amp rack, but you used the X8 in the design in the HAMMERFALL. For the HAMMERFALL.
So he noticed that.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. So we have two generations of amp rack. We started up using two X8s as was in the picture, and was on tour with HAMMERFALL, but then we changed to 3X4. But Harmonia and the presets and everything is the same, and you can combine it to two racks, so it doesn't really matter which one you have in stock, or you can have both.
Yes. Next question first. What subwoofer array configurations are you using for the SMS 118? Well,
in the HAMMERFALL, I guess the question is related to, or?
I think so.
Yes. Yeah, so he put up a broadside, and he also steered it, so curve it by delay. That's what's used in the HAMMERFALL. In the beginning of the one I talked about, the system in that little concert hall, I didn't have any subs at all.
Okay, Dave.
Okay, here's a question around related to the cards. Can you explain more about the idea with the downfill card and the SM5 card?
Yeah, so the downfield card is something that you really start up by having or purchasing, because that you will always use that. So if you're a little company doing small job where just 4 boxes is okay, you start up by having the downfield card, and that has 2 SM5s and a 10 and a 20. And then if you're doing bigger jobs, you add a card consisting of just 4 SM5s, and you probably would equip them with the 70 degrees wave panels. So that makes a mid-throw card. And then if you're having bigger job, you just add the far throw card, which is equipped with SM5s and the 55 waveguides. And then you can keep up adding those cards up till to whatever the 6 card, 24 boxes. So that kind of the strategy. You have 2 different cards, the downfield and in a combination of mid throw and far throw.
Yes, thanks, Jürgen. Another interesting question. Could you perhaps speak a little about the minimum coupling angles between the SM5 modules and the effects of the HF coupling at 0 degrees, so between the multiple modules, SM5s? And in terms of the minimum coupling angle, so how many modules would you couple at 0 degrees in longer arrays at the top of the array, and the effect of the HF coupling?
Oh, okay. Well, that's really dependent on the application. If you have a huge throw, you just need to zero them, more or less. I've done a couple of gigs where in 50-55 meters outdoor, I needed a couple of them to be at 0, and that works just fine. Remember, if you take 4 boxes and you splay them, at 5 degrees, so no overlap at all, and then you just trade that 4 boxes up to 0, that is 11 dB at 8K. So that's a lot of power in splaying or overlapping boxes. So it has to be adjusted to the throw distance and your vertical requirements.
Makes sense. Thanks.
Yes. So I see something interesting here around software. So what different software packages can we make projections? Are there any free ones?
Yes, there is. There is 2 free ones. Both of them are free. The first one is doing just direct field calculations, and that is Ease Focus, which is a very nice software for quick and the auto splay functions that they have developed there is working really great. You can there's a good starting point. You can improve it by doing it manually, but that is for quick, probably touring purposes. If you want to really calculate the total SPL, including the diffuse field, or speech intelligibility, or even if you want to listen to the sound system within a room that doesn't even exist, that doesn't even built yet, there is another software called Modeler, which you connect in a playback unit, so you can do oralization. So both of them are actually free.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jürgen.
There's another question about amplifiers, Jürgen, and this is about Labgruppen, I think. If we can use it, you already answered the question about the K-series, so I think this is in the same line, or?
Yeah. We want to keep, I mean, if you're touring in or renting a system in Italy or Mexico, it should sound the same. So we kept it to our own amplifier, which is the Power Match series, and we also supply presets for X series from PowerSoft. That's the only 2 amplifiers that are kind of guaranteed it will sound like we want it.
Yeah, and our amp racks come with the 3-phase connector, right? Connection.
Yeah, so the X series are 3-phase powered.
Do we have more, Dave?
Yes,
I think we're almost there.
We're almost there. I see, are these speakers controlled through RS485?
No. These are not active ones.
No.
I think that's no.
No, so the speakers are passive.
Yes.
The amplifiers within the rack.
Okay. So I think with that we covered the questions. In case you have a question popping up right after this session, or maybe tomorrow or later this week, feel free to connect with us, with Bose, or with your sales person. Of course, we are happy to answer any burning questions that you might have. So we are still here to help you there. An important note to make is that I would like to mention in the webinar view you see a handout section. That's actually where you can download a nice brochure where we have more information of this webinar and more information about Bose and useful and nice links that are there. At the end of the webinar, we will also automatically redirect your webinar window to a Bose website, where you can register yourself if you want more information about cool events, news about ShowMatch, demonstrations. So it's really, we don't spam people with that. It's really, if we think this is useful information for our audience, we will send it out. So feel free to go there and register if you like.
Yeah, from my side, from our side, thank you, Jürgen, as well for your explanations today. Yeah. And I think we're there for today.
Thank you.
And then I want to say stay safe, please, and I hope to see you in one of the next upcoming webinars. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.